Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Fundamental Principle. With me today is my esteemed guest and good friend, Mr. Pete Quiñones, host of the Pete Quiñones Show, available on all your major podcasters. Mr. Quiñones, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dee. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I think that some introduction is in order for our listeners. Would you just tell our listeners about yourself and kind of a brief sketch of your religious background?
Yeah, I was born into a Catholic family, baptized the Christmas Eve, the year I was born, 45 days later, raised in a Catholic household, altar boy, Catholic high school, actually started out in a Jesuit school back when it wasn't so bad. And I ended up transferring out and finishing off in a Diocese of New York Catholic school, graduated. Did the typical thing that a lot of guys do as soon as I graduated high school, stopped going to church. Around the time I was 28, I started going back to church, but I went to a Baptist church. A friend invited me to a Baptist church, and I dove headfirst into Protestantism for about 5 years, which included a stint in a Presbyterian Church of America seminary. Some people may even remember the name D. James Kennedy, who was a staunch conservative, hardcore right-winger. It was his seminary, and became, through going to churches and Baptist churches and just seeing the politics, seeing how you were going to have a church split. It seemed like there was a church split every other year. I became completely just demoralized by it. And I didn't go to church for a lot of years, and started going to, back when I met my wife. She's Baptist, grew up Baptist, raised in a Baptist church, started going back to a Baptist church with her, a Reformed Baptist church. And then when we moved to where we are now, there's a very small Novus Ordo parish church in this community, and I felt drawn to it and went back. And as soon as I went back to confession. I went to confession for the first time in decades, and took communion and started calling myself a Catholic again. And I'm back home. I'm where I'm supposed to be, where my ancestors were, and I feel very much at home.
That's good. I think very typically, you're a Gen Xer, as am I. I'm the tail end Charlie of Gen X, but the Novus Ordo Mass is only as old as us, right? It was promulgated in 1970, and it's going to die with the boomers. There's nobody who really truly believes in it, who's like a hardcore fan of the new Mass, who like has kids. And if the church just said, this has been a mistake, we're going back to the old Mass, most of the people who go to the new Mass would just be like, oh, okay, and go along. I very sincerely believe that most people who still attend Mass, who attend the Novus Ordo, and have children would prefer the old Mass if they had the chance. And the reason I bring up your age is that complete failure of the church to shepherd its people from, I don't know, 1970 to 1990, 1995, 2000. I mean, pick to the present, I guess, has devastating consequences for people. And, ex-Catholics are the largest, or the second largest religious group in the United States of America, precisely because the church has failed in her mission to teach people. And, praise God, you're back. But if all you're getting is like felt banners and lousy Marty Haugen hymns at your local Novus Ordo church, you're not getting anything. And it's certainly not like a place you can raise kids or maintain your own faith. And I just would wonder if you would elaborate on that a little bit, because this complete institutional failure we're seeing, not just from the church, but from, political leaders and the media. And there's nothing that you can grab onto this and say, these people aren't going to lie to me, especially after 2020, right? There's nowhere you can go that's on solid epistemological footing where you can say the truth is here, at least. And I wondered if you'd just elaborate on that or talk about that a little bit with respect to the religious stuff.
Yeah, as soon as I started going back, I immediately started, wondering where, if anywhere, there was a Latin Mass around here, where there was a traditional Mass. And the closest one is an hour and a half away. It's in Birmingham. And I've been to it before. The first Friday of every month, they have one. They have them every Sunday. And they're low masses. There are other ones where they do a full mass in Alabama, but we're talking 2.5, 3 hours away. A lot of people don't realize just how big Alabama is. It's huge. And the interesting thing about it is, there is a Catholic history in Alabama, because it was settled by so many Germans, especially in the upper central part of it. So there are a couple monasteries up there, actually. And so, yeah, so even though when I have to, I go to the Novus Ordo Mass. I will, locally, I do make the trip. One of my brothers from the Old Glory Club was down here recently, and we went to the Mass in Birmingham with he and his fiance. And yeah, it's just completely different in that. I think one of the first things that struck me when I went was that this is what my ancestors did. This is how my ancestors worshipped. And this is how I should be worshiping. And another thing about going back to, see, my mom was a 2 to 3 Mass a week person until 1970. And then she fell off. And it was because, she liked the old style of the Mass. And in New York City, you really feel everyone has a real pull to their parish church, the neighborhood church. And you would have had to travel for that. But yeah, I think that one of the reasons why after high school I fell away is because by that time, I mean, the church, the school I went to a Catholic school. I went to Archdiocese school. It wasn't even the quote unquote religious class that you had every semester wasn't even religion. It was at one point, it was my senior year, the last half of my senior year, it was like self-help. It was like Leo Buscaglia kind of stuff. And so there was nothing, there was no tradition, there was no real tie to my past. And I think, Thomas 777 always talks about how we've just been completely deracinated from our history, and we're not allowed to live historically anymore. And I
Yeah,
think that, yeah, good.
You basically lived slaughter of cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, my whole neighborhood that I grew up in the Bronx. When I was growing up, my neighborhood was predominantly Puerto Rican, Dominican, and probably like 60 to 70% Puerto Rican, Dominican, 20%, 25 to 27% Black, and there was still like a 3% Irish remnant. And if you would have went back 20 years, that would have been like 80% Irish neighborhood. If you would have went back 50 years, it would have been predominantly a Jewish neighborhood, actually. But it was predominantly an Irish neighborhood, I would say 10 to 12 years, 10, 20 years before I was born. And that's why it's predominantly Catholic. And that's why You had, I mean, there was a parish, like every parish church every 6 blocks. We had Sacred Heart School was just up 7 blocks, and then St. Jerome's was 1 block over and 1 block up, and that was the church I went to growing up. And yeah, it went from a full church in the 50s and 60s to, you were lucky to fill that church on Easter or Christmas, and most Sundays it was maybe a quarter full. And that can be pointed directly to the slaughter of cities. And just to mention, there was, in the building I grew up in, right next door, there was they tore down a building there and they built a church, and it was a like missionary Baptist church. And if anybody knows what missionary Baptist church is, it was a black church, and that didn't exist before I grew. When my mother was a child.
Right. And it's not the job of the church necessarily to like assign you, like, Monsignor assigns you a GF at age 17 or something. It says, all right, Peter, you're gonna get married with Becky. But it is the job of the church to create a social environment where the faith can be lived, and then things flow from that. Where if you still lived in the old neighborhood and all the girls in the neighborhood knew, like, you're going to marry a local guy, and your kids are your parents were baptized here at St. Jerome's, you were baptized here at St. Jerome's, your kids are going to get baptized here at St. Jerome's, you're going to meet a guy from the local parish, dating outside the parish is considered exotic, right? Like, oh, I dated a guy from St. Patrick's down the street, like, 3 whole blocks away. He's Polish. Right, like, that environment is conducive to people, getting married, having the faith, having children, having the faith passed on. And us extras, right, we're the middle children of history. We're latchkey kids. A lot of us didn't get married or got divorced and didn't have kids, and this is like structural problems, like, if you individually don't get married, that's one thing. But when, like, you and all your best friends from high school and half the guys you knew in college all didn't get married, there's a problem, right? And D. James Kennedy, for all of his faults, PC USA, right? Politically Correct Church USA. There's at least an attempt by these folks to, like, create their own media and try and, like, live in a countercultural way that Catholics only just now recently started doing, right? Christian radio was a thing going back to the 50s. And, Catholic podcast, it's only been the last 20 years that we've tried to create our own. I guess EWTN's 30 years old now, but, like, an attempt to create our own separate ecosystem has only really kind of been made in the last 30 years after the asteroid hit, after it was too late. And it's like, well, if you'd kept that up, then maybe you'd have some success. But right now, the average person in the pews has no idea what they're supposed to believe. They don't believe in the reality of the Eucharist. They don't believe the church's teachings on things like contraception. And you wonder why, like, the pews are empty and people aren't getting married in the church. It's like, well, most of the people you're dealing with don't actually know what they're talking about. And because they haven't been taught, it's not I mean, you have some of all human knowledge in your pocket, but they don't even know where to start looking.
Well, as we've talked about previously, Western civilization had to undergo its trials and its judgment through Nuremberg, through the Nuremberg trials. And the same thing was Vatican II for the Catholic Church. If there was
Yeah,
one, yeah,
same people did it too.
yeah, same people are responsible. But if there was one institution that you thought would survive all of this, it would have been, if you would look back through history, if you look back through our history, you would think it would be the Catholic Church. And I think it, just like everything else, it's fallen to modernity. And is it O'Sullivan's law? If something is not explicitly right wing, it will go left wing. I mean, I don't even know if you want to call the Catholic Church right wing. You just want to call it Catholic. But as far as like traditional, if something is not going to remain explicitly so, it's going to veer into modernity, and that's what we saw. And some people could argue, oh, well, having your own network and your radio stations, and this is is that's just embracing modernity. No, it's just embracing tools. It's no different than using a dishwasher instead of washing dishes by hand.
It's no different than publishing the Catechism of the Council of Trent with printing it, right? It's just using the tool. Maximilian Kolbe used radio to evangelize, and that was that's conquest. One of Robert Conquest's laws of politics is that which is not explicitly right wing will eventually become left wing, and nevertheless, Vatican II got its Nuremberg because fundamentally, right? And this is one thing where kind of the liberals are more right than the conservatives, as opposed to the traditionalists. The conservatives seek to conserve the post-war consensus, and they don't understand that the post-war consensus is inherently liberal and contradictory to the Catholic faith, and to political stability, and to family life, and to everything, right? Liberalism as such is hostile to Catholicism. And John Henry Newman talked about it, like 130 years ago. Like, you can be a liberal or you can be a Christian, but you can't be both. Like, it is impossible, because the nature of big L liberalism, I'm not talking about, the Democratic Party or libtards or anything. I'm talking about the political philosophy of liberalism is that man is necessarily, by his nature, free, and that things that impinge on that freedom are bad. James Lindsay, for all of his many, many, many faults, is completely correct in that, like, traditional Catholicism and James Lindsay do not get along. Now, that just makes him a leftist and an enemy of all good order and decent thinking people. But that's not, he's not wrong that, like, traditional Catholicism and, like, his classical liberalism are in conflict. That might be the one thing he's right about.
Well, I think one of the things that I see is I'm reading a book right now on the show called "The Demon in Democracy" by Ryszard Legutko, and he's Polish. And I've looked; he doesn't advertise what he is. It doesn't say on his wiki, but I think that he is Roman Catholic from things I've seen, and what he talks about in that book is that one of the hallmarks of liberalism is that you're constantly going somewhere. You're on a path. It's on a path to. It's just like communism. Communism is on its path, and it has this end goal. And liberalism has this end goal too. And the end goal is not traditionalism. It's not the Catholic Church. And it's the enemy. Because if you're on a path going somewhere and you're constantly veering off here, veering off there, which is what we see liberalism do, that's how you can veer off into transgenderism and race communism and all of these things. The church is supposed to be the rock. It's supposed to be. Yeah. It's supposed to be Peter. It's not supposed to move anywhere. And
right.
What you've seen is when
a dogma that changes is useless. Right.
Yeah. What you see is once someone embraces modernity, now it's no longer that rock. It's no longer that foundation upon which people can run to when there's a storm, to hold on to and not be thrown to and fro, especially in their faith, but especially when the culture is becoming what it is. And yeah, as soon as you decide that liberalism, that you're going to embrace modernity, which is liberalism, now you're on a path somewhere. And if you're on a path and you were this rock that didn't move and now you're rolling, well, obviously you're going to be picking things up along the way. And what
Well,
if
and where do you stop?
yeah, I mean,
And how? And who says?
this has no endpoint, because one of the goals of progressivism, and which I don't consider to be any different than liberalism, is you're going towards this perfection. But we know that you can never reach this perfection. So basically what it turns into is it turns into a tool for deviance. It turns into a tool where deviants can control people who have a historical outlook, who are trying to live historically, and you're telling them, no, you're wrong. You have to get on this ride with us. And if you don't get on this ride with us and take on every piece of rotten moss that this rolling rock is picking up, well, there's something wrong with you. And so, I mean, to me, all of this is spiritual. All of this is
Yeah.
spiritual warfare. So I can say that, oh, well, the church is trying to go along and just, but no, you can't make excuses for this. You can't. There's no, when he said, upon this rock, I will build my church, that rock was a solid foundation. There's no solid foundation anymore. So is there any, why are people confused that there are rainbow flags outside, outside of Catholic
Yeah.
churches?
Yeah. There's a church in New York, Jesuit church in New York, just recently, like celebrating a mass for perverts, right? Like, this is, of course, completely unacceptable. And the teleology of liberalism, for those of you who don't know, teleology is the study of ends, like what are the purposes of things. And the teleology of liberalism is to basically turn everyone into their own Satan, because non serviam is the whole of the credo of liberalism. I will not serve the king. I will not serve my family. I will not serve. I won't do my duty, right? Effectively, or I have no duties, or any duties that have been imposed on me are ipso facto immoral because they limit my freedom. Well, freedom to do what? Like, take a lot of drugs? Like, is that freedom?
I mean, that is what, when we both called ourselves libertarians at one time, and that's really what it is. Somebody, just on Twitter today, I saw a couple libertarians having a conversation, and one said, in the conversation, I guess to make a point, a libertarian says, does a parent have a duty to make sure that their child is taken care of and fed? Yeah, and my response to it was, okay, so what's the next question? What if that child consents?
Yeah,
No,
are you retarded?
yeah,
Like, yes, of course they do. Like, that's that's like the very definition of parenthood. Yeah, you got to make sure your kids eat.
I'm not a parent. I think that should be it for anybody who's never heard me before. I'm not a parent. Jerome and I have talked off air before about why that is. I don't know that it's a good excuse, but it is the reason why I never had children. But I mean, I'm also not one of those people who was ever like, no, you should never have children. Don't bring a child into this world. Yeah. Maybe I've said that in the past. Maybe when I was a libertarian and I was at my most black pilled, I was like, why would anybody bring a child into this world? But I've repented of all those sins. The sins of libertarianism are long. the list is long, and they must all be repented of.
Well,
And yeah,
and
good.
there's many solid, wonderful people who are Catholic who identify as libertarian or used to identify as libertarian. I wouldn't be here today without stalwart, wonderful people like um, Tom Woods or Lou Rockwell, who are both faithful Catholics. Um, uh, Instrumental in me being here today. Tom Woods' book, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, absolute must read. You got to pick it up. You got to read it. Get a hard copy. It's an outstanding book. But him and Chris Farrar's book on the changes in the church, absolutely must read. Jeffrey Tucker's writing in Latin Mass Magazine and elsewhere, instrumental in me getting here, and all three, but ultimately, and I want to make a distinction here between St. Thomas's, essence of good thinking is the proper distinctions. Hoppian libertarians are people who wanted to get the total state off of their back so that they could live their lives. And I think that they ultimately come up to that, contradiction between total freedom and the necessity of submitting yourself to God. But wanting our awful satanic Nuremberg regime off your back so that you could actually live historically and live a Catholic life is one thing. It's the people who think that, the sum total libertarianism is like weed and abortion, are the problem right now. If every libertarian was like a Tom Woods type libertarian who just was like personally an outstanding person and just didn't want the state bothering him so he could be that sort of wonderful person that he is, you could make a case for libertarianism being a useful or good thing. But at the moment, right, like, the libertarian presidential candidate is a drug taking, pervert whose chief concern wasn't like the destruction of liberty and private property in 2020, but rather that like we're mean to people who like put on dudes who put on dresses, and we can't tell them that they can't go to the bathroom with like 13-year-old girls. Right.
Yeah.
That is a religious commitment. When you're saying freedom requires fathers to let a dude in a dress who has really weird fetishes use the same restroom as your preteen daughter, like that's not freedom anymore. That's just, pardon my language, but fucking weird. Like there's no defending that. And the decent people I have mentioned don't defend that. They say that this is crazy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and whenever you talk about a group and you generalize, there's going to be outliers there. And Tom Woods is a really good friend of mine, and he is a good example of what you're talking about. But the really attacking the path that we've gone on as a society and what we've been forced into. And believe me, we have been forced into it. After World War II, it is looked down upon. They will make a target of you, whether through the IRS, whether through CPS, if you are a hardcore Catholic. And we've seen that. There's a lady in jail right now that I hope Trump is going to pardon and get out of jail, or do whatever he needs to do to get her out, who was just praying the rosary at an abortion clinic. And our Jewish attorney general targeted her like he's targeted so many Catholics since he's been in office.
Right. And the father used the FACE Act, right? Like an insane person assaulted his son, and he, stopped the guy from assaulting his son, and then got thrown in jail, or had, a bunch of heavily armed FBI agents like storm his house, point guns at his kids, and right. You can't AA is probably the only spiritually useful thing the United States of America has ever contributed to world culture. And step one is admitting you got a problem. And step one for any cogent analysis of the Nuremberg regime is who's in charge. It's not Catholics. It's not Christians, right? This obsession with minority rights. We always have to protect the minority. Well, who's the minority? And it's never the obverse of what about the rights of the majority to live in a functional society? It's no, we have to make accommodations for drug addicts and perverts and mentally unstable people and people who can't read and people who, whatever. There's always the Z-Man will make the joke of left-handed ginger Koreans in wheelchairs, right? And why? Does that person even exist? If that person exists, the progressive stack says this person has to be the first person that we care about. It's what about all the other people who deserve to live in a functioning society? What about the vast majority of people who just want to have their taxes lowered, have roads that don't look like the dark side of the moon, and have their schools that they're paying for be something they could actually send their kids to safely? Do they have any rights? Well, not if the minority says, you being functional is oppressing me. Well, they're always going to say that because to them, normality is oppression, right? Expecting women to get married and have kids is oppression because, Zur is a lesbian and she doesn't want to get married to a dude. Now, never mind if you just stopped, entertaining this nonsense, they'd find that they were happily married and had a couple kids. And if you just didn't let them have the option of this being a thing, right, that they'd be happy and functional. And, freedom to destroy yourself is not freedom. And that's what libertarianism or our modern Nuremberg regime says, is that freedom to destroy yourself is the ultimate freedom. Unless you can destroy yourself, you're not free, right? The positive moral good of seeking Canadian healthcare, right? Of the Canadian state or, the state of Oregon or whatever, killing yourself is freedom. But we have no duty as the state of Oregon or the state of, the nation of Canada or national government of Canada to actually provide a stable enough society where you don't feel like you have to kill yourself.
Well, it's not only all that, but if you're somebody who decides that they're going to take it upon themselves to promote that people don't destroy themselves, that is, you're seen as you're the next Hitler. You're a fascist. You're somebody who wants to overthrow the order, quote unquote order. If I love that they call it the post-war, the post-war order. There's no order to this. You're not allowed to do that. You're not. You have to hide. You have to pretend you're doing something else. You have to be somebody who becomes somebody who you're doing something outwardly. You almost have to make it seem as if you're doing something different than what you're actually doing, something that's more in line with what the order is now. And that's ironically what they call liberty. Is, we have liberty now. People are free to do what they want. Well, you're free to do what you want as long as you're destroying the individual, as long as you're destroying yourself, and as long as you're promoting destroying other people. But as soon as you try to stop people from destroying themselves, to stop people from, worshiping Satan, worshiping demons, communing with demons, then you become the person who is, now you're the bad guy. Now you're the threat to civilization.
Right. Then we have to put you on a banking watch list and take away your YouTube monetization. And, right.
I know
Right. All
people.
kinds of.
I know people who figured this out years ago. 15 years ago, I was in Skype groups with people who call themselves sovereign citizens. And these were people who were like, we want to go totally off the grid. We don't want anything to do with this anymore. We're going to run generators. We're not even going to take the power. We're going to use our own power. We're going to generate our own power. We're not going to pay a government agency, which is basically what most power companies and gas companies are, or
Yeah.
government
No, there's
agencies.
no such thing as like a private utility company.
Right.
Sorry. Like
Yeah.
The mere idea is absurd. Like, no.
And I know people who did that and were kidnapped out of their house, thrown into mental asylums, and pumped full of drugs. I know people that personally that happened to, where they became wards of the state and they were sedated and medicated because they decided they didn't want to be a part of this anymore.
Right. Well, obviously they're mentally ill, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want to, if you're not worshiping sodomy, pornography, the government, this regime, transgender, there obviously is something wrong with you.
Well, and this is one of those notions, right, that libertarianism ultimately fails, is right, like, because the government's always going to throw crazy people in jail. Like, that's just what it's going to do. Now, the question is are the crazy people the people who want to live in the woods with their own solar panels, or is the crazy people like Bruce Jenner?
Yeah,
who
destroy other people because they are seen in public and they are not only are they legitimized, but they're championed. And you wonder how your child is questioning, how a child can question whether they're a boy or a girl. And it's because instead of, the heroes of the faith or, Padre Pio or someone like that being elevated and being talked about and being championed, which even the church doesn't do.
Not anymore, no.
Yeah. Then, well, what do you expect? Well, we need to minister to these people. We need to. That's why we put the rainbow flag out, so we can get these people in there. We could. No, you're not trying to get them. You're not trying to get them to change. You're just trying to get them to be members. And what do they end up doing? When you let those people in the door, they always end up changing you.
Right. You never change them, ever. Because if you buy the premises, I've been around a long time, and you and I both have friends that were kind of the red pill game guys from 10 and 15 years ago. And a lot of that was used towards evil ends, right? Just notching up, like figuring out girls and then using that knowledge to sleep with a lot of women was immoral. It still is immoral. But one of the things that they said that I think is absolutely true is that if you buy the frame, you buy the farm. And if you let the enemy, capital E in this case, right? Like, if you let Satan set the terms of the debate, if you're playing on Satan's field, you're going to lose all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively, the post-Nuremberg regime, liberalism, is playing on using Satan's rules. If you're not willing to say X is good and Y is bad, and, the people who promote Y, error has no rights. If you think that, Bruce Jenner's a beautiful woman, like, I am sorry, you are mistaken, and you don't have a right to spout that nonsense in public, because it destroys society if you do it.
Well, and if you don't have a church that's willing that has wealth, that has status, that is powerful, if they want to use that power, if they're not willing to stand up and to fight against this, it's very easy to understand how people can become black-pilled, because you look around and you're like, okay, who's fighting against this? Donald Trump? And then people are like, well, we just go and we vote for Donald Trump and everything will be okay. Donald Trump is a post-Nuremberg Civil Rights Act liberal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, you just appointed Kimberly Guilfoyle, right? The like twice divorced, broke off an engagement with Don Jr., like single mom, like plastic surgery afterwards. Like, he just appointed her ambassador to Greece. Like, this is not a like
one of the oldest Christian civilizations on the planet.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like, the Greeks became Christians and gave us the church fathers. The Aztecs became Christian and gave us, after 500 years of being Christian, the Greeks gave us the church fathers. Almost in their entirety, right? They gave us the translation of the scriptures, and 500 years of the Aztecs being Catholic, we've gotten Our Lady Guadalupe tattoos and like candles. Like, this is things are different. Not all things are the same. Not all people are the same. Some people are tall, some people are short, some people are smart, some people are stupid. That's just the nature of reality. And anybody that wants to sit there and say that, the point of the show is that like reality exists, right? And this Nuremberg regime, effectively, it's one like unbreakable commandment is that equality uber alles, right? And that doesn't mean, that means they'll, staple stilts to a short guy's feet and cut a tall guy off at the knees, and like do Island of Dr. Moreau type stuff to make everyone the same height. It's like, well, that's monstrous and evil and wrong. Well, not in a pursuit of equality, it isn't, because that's the one true that's the the one real God we have is, and of course that leads to a terrible society, right?
Well, and the church goes right along with it,
right? Because
yeah,
continue, please.
Yeah, well, no, because it's following the world's footsteps. One of the reasons why I left, just became very quickly disillusioned with Protestantism, is because of the splinters, because it is a protest. It's one gigantic protest. And I understand like the history of it. I tried to go to confessional churches. Even when I went to a Baptist church, it was a Baptist church that went by the 1689 confession. And that's great. You're saying, okay, this is what we believe. We have this confession. We have the Westminster Confession of Faith. We have the 1689 Baptist Confession. Okay. But you're also saying that people can read the Bible and interpret it for themselves. So what is that confession for, other than it's a guideline? This is what gives us our legitimacy. Yet we have people in there who can believe whatever they want and be feminists and promote abortion, things like that. And it's the same problem with the Catholic Church. Is there was a time in the Catholic Church where if you stepped out of line, if you went against the catechism, what the church believed, you were pulled aside and you went through discipline.
Yeah. Well, and look at Bishop Williamson, right? Like the one bishop who's been like, no, is, he questioned the official religion of the Nuremberg regime. Right. And that's unacceptable. But Nancy Pelosi can be like, nah, Archbishop Corleone's not going to do anything. I'm going to receive communion. It's my faith. He can't tell me what to do. So like, okay, well, me and Nancy Pelosi agree that the bishops are spineless worms and they'll never do anything. Like, here's this woman who's obstinate, is, like she's a public manifest heretic. And these guys don't have the stones to do anything, but they'll go after, podcasters who think that bagels aren't our friends. because they believe what the Nuremberg regime teaches. They're not Catholics.
When I was in the Baptist church, I remember being with a friend of mine, hanging out with a friend of mine who was more he was he liked the idea of home churches. He believed that the New Testament taught that, oh, they met in homes, and the supper was not the Eucharist; it was like a full meal, and you sat around having a full meal. And I remember him standing there one day and going, look at the way this church is set up. This is set up really no different than the Catholic Church. There's a lectern there. We just call it a lectern. They call it an altar and everything. And it occurred to me as he's saying this, I'm going, you didn't copy the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church copied this. Because really, the Novus Ordo Mass is really just a Protestant, like a take on the Protestant Mass, the Protestant service.
Yeah, it's highly Protestantized. Ottaviani talked about it, who was the head of the Holy Office, right, in the Ottaviani intervention. And this was the pre Novus Ordo Mass. Like, this wasn't even. It was highly Protestantized. I would strongly recommend everyone pick up. If you don't have a physical copy, get one of the late Father Anthony Cicada, his book Work of Human Hands. Like, this Mass that you go to every Sunday is more Protestant than not, and it hasn't led to. It's led to Catholics becoming Protestants, leaving the Catholic faith and becoming Protestant far, far more than vice versa.
What's interesting is there's a Novus Ordo church I go to here, and the priest there is actually a former Protestant preacher. And the one of the Catholic podcasts I listen to all the time is Shameless Popery with Joe Heschmeyer, and I believe he's a former Protestant too. And I think the thing that gives me some hope is that you do see more people coming to the Catholic Church, but also you see more people coming to the Catholic Church and going, okay, where can I attend a traditional Latin Mass?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The traditional Latin Mass is growing by leaps and bounds, despite all the restrictions and tradition and custody and the attacks and everything else.
Do you know what demographic right now is averaging more kids than any other, having more children than any other in the world?
The Amish?
Traditional Latin Mass attendees.
Oh, that's true. I mean, at my parish, my wife has earned her Mother's Cross, but we have a small family, because we're only the silver Mother's Cross.
But yeah,
it's not unusual for people to have 10, 12 more children. Yeah.
You do see a lot. I think there is a lot of hope there. I was Stormy Waters, for people who've never heard my show, should go listen to, I'm going to drop an episode with him on Sunday, which is probably going to get us in trouble. 2 hours and 20 minutes of talking about the assassination of this United Healthcare demon. In the past,
all I have to say about that is that injustice, the wage earner, and oppression of the poor are sins that cry to heaven for vengeance. And that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah. Stormy and I we've been talking about, like, the Rosary and and he goes back into, and he's studied a lot of Catholic mysticism of the past. So, and not nearly as much as I have. I mean, more than I have. I haven't nearly as much. But, one thing that I have taken to strongly is the Rosary every single day. And I see a change in my life since, and I've been talking to him, and, what we're starting to understand, and what we want to start talking about more, is the fact that this war that's happening, it's an eternal war. Spiritual warfare is eternal, until Christ comes back. We've been given weapons to use in this, and people have completely ignored him. People have completely overlooked him.
That's right. Yeah, the Padre Pio, when they bring me my weapon, and he would, his rosary, right, and like the scriptures itself say, that the devil is like a roaring lion, prowling about this world, seeking this ruin of souls. And if you've ever been to a zoo and seen an African lion up close, they're pretty scary. The Eurasian lion was bigger. The lion that was mentioned in the scriptures that would haunt the mountains of Anatolia and Greece and all these other places, like even bigger and scarier. 8 feet long, 1,000, 800 pounds of muscle with teeth like steak knives and claws like razors. Just, you have no idea how scary that sort of thing is until you've actually seen it. If you've ever been out in the wild, right, and run into a big scary animal, like it just grabs you by the spine and like, and fortunately, whenever I've been in that sort of situation, I was with lots of people when we had firearms. But imagine, like, you're by yourself and all you've got is maybe a sling, right? It's scary. So it's meant to be scary. It is scary. Like hell is forever. It's real. People go there, according to the tradition of the church and things like Our Lady of Fatima. Lots of people go there, like snowstorm, like snow in a blizzard. What the children of Fatima said. That's like what souls falling into hell is like. And if your pastor or your bishop or your other authorities don't take it seriously, that doesn't mean you shouldn't. And I think that that's a very important thing. One of the reasons this show got launched is I want to give Catholic men in particular a chance to engage with reality and deal with the world as it actually is, so that they can actually save their souls and deal with the problems of the world as it actually is.
Well, and yeah, and here's the thing: is I've been on a lot of sides of these things. I've been a libertarian. I am what I am now, which I don't even know how to even label what I am now. I'm I'm almost going back to my libertarianism, where I'm like, I'm neither left nor right. I think at this point, it's just like, as far as politics go, I'm just a nationalist, and that's it. It's like there's a people, the nation's a people, and we have to find our people, figure out who our people are. But I also I've been a Protestant. I've gone to a Protestant church, but I was born Catholic and raised Catholic and fell away like so many, and come back and repented. And one of the problems I've had watching a lot of Catholics even is watching them being pulled away from the faith because of politics. And this can happen at any time in history. At any time in history, things can get really bad as far as the culture, and people tend to, and a lot of times the church would follow with it. I forget who said it this morning. I think it was Greg Hood said on Twitter. Somebody said that Pope Francis is the worst pope ever, and Greg Hood's like, he's not even in like the bottom 10. And we have to remember that what's most important.
Well, I mean, in terms of teaching as a person, maybe, like as Pope, qua Pope, I think he's probably the worst, if he even is. I'm of the opinion that he's probably an anti-pope, because his election was illegitimate for multiple reasons. But that's a separate discussion. And Greg Hood is, I think, one of the most knowledgeable people out there in the world right now. And certainly he's no Alexander VI in terms of his personal conduct, I don't think. But what I think is important is not just the, like, oh, look at how bad things are, or look at, politically speaking. This is why historical knowledge is so important. You can look back at the pornocracy when, Peter Damian wrote his, Book of Gomorrah against like, perverts in clerical robes. Like certain problems just occur over and over again, right? And rather than abandon ship because the captain is bad, we can't do anything about that. Our station in life is to do the best we can in the place that God's put us. And if that means, like, as a dad, you have to ignore like everything the Pope says and just be like, okay, well, we're just going to go to the old mass and say the rosary. Like, that's what you can do, right?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is politically, there's a lot of us who are like, what Thomas talks about. We need to go back to living historically. And by living historically, it means that you're abandoning this whole idea of progress, this whole idea of liberalism. And the same goes with the church. You just have to know the truth and live the truth. And you can do that. And you can not only do that in the worst times of trouble, but you have to do that in the worst times of trouble. That is your duty. Your duty is not only to survive through those times, but to thrive through those times and to teach others. And, I think that's where I've failed is I've done a good job of talking to people politically about, where we are and maybe what their thought process should be as far as politics goes. But I don't think I've done as good a job when it comes to faith. Because I know there are a lot of good Protestants out there. I think Corey Mahler is, like a perfect example of it. Someone who is, who's a soldier fighting against the same evil we're fighting against. But, we believe as Catholics that we have the truth. And,
right. And so does he. And he's wrong and he thinks we're wrong. But nevertheless, and this is why I've actually interviewed Mr. Mahler. They'll be dropping an interview with him shortly, I guess. The important thing isn't right now, at our present moment, right? The soteriological debates, the the sola scriptura debate, right? Like all those arguments, they've been had 1,000 times, right? Between the Catholics, the Lutherans, the Reformed, the Eastern Orthodox, like those arguments are almost set in stone, right? Like you believe what you're going to believe. What is more important, I think, at this particular time, I don't want to discount any of those things. But our mutual friend Jason Miranchuk put it this way: like, you don't live in a civilization anymore. And I think the important thing for all of us to do is to reestablish a Christian civilization. And then once that's established and the baseline thing that was the reality in Europe for, to most of the last 2,000 years, that this was Christendom from, Vladivostok to Chicago, right? That reestablishing that is far more important than like owning like a Reformed guy on his arguments about sola scriptura. I think those are wrong. But me saying like Nina, you're wrong is way less important than like, how about we make sure that there's no dudes in the middle school girls' locker room as a first step. And then we'll move to, whatever arguments we need to have about faith versus works and, the Epistle to James and what have you.
Yeah, and we have historic precedent for, when those discussions don't bear any fruit, we have the historic precedent for separation, which is, it could be political as well. So yeah, I definitely am not wanting to fight a crusade against Protestants or Orthodox or anyone. Buck Johnson's a really good friend of mine, and we were hanging out in Texas a couple months ago, and we just, we're like, this, the enemy is not us. The enemy is out there, and we really need to be arm in arm to fight against this enemy. And then, after that, we can figure it out. But I mean, the enemy right now not only is attacking our body and attacking us politically, but it's attacking our spirit and our souls. And that's one thing that people just don't get. If that's the one thing, it's one of the reasons why, I do appreciate the libertarians who are Catholics and, who are Christian and understand that, I have a hard time. I would have a hard time calling myself a libertarian, even if I still had inclinations towards that belief system, that political system, just because of the fact that all of these leaders can be great leaders. But when you encounter the average libertarian, they're atheist, anti-family, anti-hierarchy, anti-truth. And
Yep.
most
Yeah,
of
no
them,
gods, no masters, right? Like,
yeah, and most of them are liberals. They're liberals in the sense that they have no they believe that a political ideology, they believe that economics, they believe that private property rights, they believe that don't hurt people and don't take their stuff replaces God's kingdom, and it
right.
just doesn't.
No, and in order to have like a libertarian society, you would need like an entire society of like Lou Rockwell's,
Yeah.
right? Like, like personally very conservative family guys who were been married for years and have like whose biggest the biggest thing is like he wants to build a good society for his grandkids and his great grandkids. Like that's or like a Ron Paul, right? I'm sure you've seen the Christmas photo of like Ron and Carol and like their huge family and all their grandkids and great grandkids. Like that's what you would need. Is like that's where it's him and his lovely wife who they've been married I think over 50 years, and they had a bunch of kids and all their kids had a bunch of kids and all their kids had kids, and so there's like babies and children and grandchildren and like
They all look alike.
they all look alike. Yeah, you can tell like there's like an 8-year-old kid who's got like that same impish grin as his grandpa, just sitting there like smiling and like I'm with my grandpa and all my aunts and uncles and my cousins and it's cool. And that's like, you want to build a libertarian society, a Christian society, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to make that normative. But for all that I no longer consider myself a libertarian, I still an unabashed admirer of Dr. Paul and personally and like politically I can say he's a man of principle. But that's what you would need that to be the norm, right? And the trouble is, of course, that's not the norm. Like Ron Paul is an outstanding human being, right? He says like he's interested in the free market. Well, then why did he deliver all those babies for free?
No, it wasn't
Right.
free. I think he charged $4 or something like that.
Oh, okay. Right. Like $4 or a dozen eggs, right? Like, like this. Well, he did that because he's a good Christian man. That's why he did it. That's why Ron Paul was able to make libertarianism work, is because he is personally an outstanding person and a good Christian who loves his neighbors.
I was on my buddy Tommy Salmon's show. I think it's actually dropping today, and he's still at the Libertarian Institute, and he wanted me to come on because I got into it with a few libertarians on Twitter, And he's like, oh, well, why don't you come on and, talk about where you're at and everything. And one of the things I told him was, I said, look, if you ever got to a libertarian society, if there ever like popped up this like pocket of libertarianism, you really need to understand that culturally it's going to look exactly like what I want. Like the society that I want. Everybody's going to have a common language. Everyone's going to have a common skin color. Everyone's probably going to have a common religion. It's going to be, it's going to be a monoculture. And that's one thing that people don't understand. I told them, I said, you just cannot, and one of the things Corey Mahler said on a recent podcast, because people will be like, well, in the church, when people come into the church, they're the same. And, they all, this is something that, E. Michael Jones talks about, which is, I love the man. What he's done to expose our oldest enemy is undeniable, but we're just not all the same. What Mr. Mahler said was, he said, when you have a church in Europe, the church needs to be run by Europeans. He goes, but if you set up a church in like Namibia, that church needs to be run by Europeans. They're not going to be capable of the faith on their own.
Yeah, look at what Archbishop Lefebvre had to say. And he was effectively the Archbishop of all of French-speaking West Africa and the Superior General of the Holy Ghost Fathers, who were primarily responsible for evangelizing West Africa. So everything good that's happened in Africa for the last 50 years in West Africa, French-speaking West Africa, is either directly or indirectly, the responsibility of one Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And, it's been my experience with actual African Christians, when you live in oil business areas, right? Like you get Nigerians and they will be like, Jerome, you must understand, demons are everywhere. Demons haunt Africa like mosquitoes haunt moose in summertime. Or deer. They are everywhere. They are like flies on horse poop. Demons everywhere. Ancestor demons, local demons, family demons, tribe demons. They are everywhere, and we cannot fight them ourselves. We need the white man and his Christianity to get rid of the demons.
Yeah.
Conversation I've straight up had, like sitting in Houston and talking to some Nigerian guy who's in the oil business, and demons everywhere. You must understand, demons.
Yeah, I've talked to other Catholics who talk about someone like Bishop Sarah and talk about how great he is and how, just how based he is. And I'm like, that didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like he discovered the Catholic faith and just studied on his own, and that's the way he became. No, white Europeans went to Africa and taught and demanded of and said, this is the way we do things. You do not deviate in one direction or the other. And that because of we're in this this liberal order, this Nuremberg regime, that's unacceptable to them. You're not allowed to have truth. Truth is whatever we say, whatever they say it is, from week to week. And all you have to do is their apparatchiks in the news will tell you what the truth is that week and what morality is that week, quote unquote morality.
Right, because Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, when they first ran for president, were anti-gay marriage. But now, right, if you say, well, if you're anti-gay marriage, you're a hopeless bigot. What, like Barack Obama and Bill Clinton? Yeah, right. Like, and what's astonishing, right, and this is one of those things that just proves most people, it's downstream from power. The ridiculous Supreme Court decision that said, like, two dudes is the same as married people with children, right? They'll never accept that. That's complete. Like, your Methodist church just completely accepts it now. Where's the contramundum? Church saying that it's willing to stand and say this is ridiculous, right? Because if you don't have gay marriage, so called, right, you don't end up with transgenderism. And you could draw a pretty fair line from contraception to abortion to where pornography to contraception to abortion, from thence to feminism and acceptance of homosexuality and homosexual sodomitic marriage, quote unquote, and from there to transgenderism. It's a pretty straight line, actually, if you think about it for more than a couple seconds. Humanae Vitae unfortunately proved right on this point. And any libertarian social order, right? Most 90% of libertarians will be like, well, of course it's their free expression to publish,
Love is love. You can love anyone you want.
Right. The First Amendment, bro. You can't tell them they can't sell pornography, that the pornographers should be in jail.
Well,
oh, really?
This is just what you're talking about is what they call a fallacy, the slippery slope. And I explained it earlier. I explained earlier why the slippery slope isn't a fallacy, because we're meant to, our faith, our truth is based upon a rock, not built on sand, not a foundation built on sand, but built on a rock. And as soon as you start rolling that rock, as soon as you start saying, okay, well, we can go this way, well, we can do this, it all just flows from it. Where formerly you stood for something, where people were, and this is another thing that most people don't get because of modernity, because of this post-Nuremberg order, is the average person, 99% of the people in the world, want stability. Deep down inside, they know they want stability. They know they want the truth. They know they just want that one thing that they can gravitate to that grounds them. They're not allowed to have it anymore. And everything that would possibly be that must be destroyed.
Exactly right. And that thing that must be destroyed, because it doesn't move, right? Then you have to destroy it. And I know that you've talked quite a bit about Spain and the Civil War in Spain and what had happened previously. And I would strongly recommend everybody, especially I think all Catholics, should be familiar with the conflict in Spain, because I think it's a microcosm of all our problems today. I really do. But in particular, your reading of the great Catholic Warren Carroll, who founded Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia. He wrote a wonderful book.
Last Crusade.
Last Crusade, yeah. And you did a reading of that on your show that is just wonderful. Everyone should check that out.
It's the most emotional thing I've ever done.
Oh, dude, I can't even talk about this Siege Bell without crying. Right there, you just heard me start to tear up, because it just moves me every time. But when you understand that the post Vatican II church in Spain, the church was the rock that stood against the tide of red Bolshevism, and the church is what allowed those great heroes of the Alcazar and elsewhere to plant their feet firmly and resist, and that therefore that church was broken. And now you see in Spain, they have no children, no one goes to mass anymore, and the Spain that brought the gospel to the far ends of the earth, to the Philippines, to Japan, to literally all the way around the world, to South America, to everywhere, Spain and Portugal, right? Those two anti-liberal regimes of Salazar and of Franco, they were undermined from within by the post revolution church, because the church had bought into the revolution, and that both destroyed the nation and destroyed the church in Spain and in Portugal, because the church refused to just stand and say no. And it was because the church stood and said no that, unfortunately, the United States of America is a revolutionary nation. The CIA had a great deal to do with the Carnation Revolution and the overthrow of Franco and the installation of so-called democracy, where 50 years on, they're digging up dead men who died as heroes and disinterring their bodies, because everything that is good must be torn down because it's illiberal.
Yeah, it reminds me that that this was all a reaction to communism spreading Marxism, and we know where that comes from. And then you have someone today, like, you have people who say, oh, well, there's cultural Marxism. They gave up on the economics. They gave up on which they really haven't. And they gave up on the political communism and just made it cultural. I would say they didn't give up on either, but the cultural is more obvious. And in the 20th century, the one example we have of the fight against that and the destruction of it is in Spain. And I don't think they could have done it without the help of Germany and Italy, who supplied arms, supplied soldiers, supplied planes. But they won. And one of the reasons, probably the biggest reason they won, is because of their Catholicism. Franco went to mass every day. He, one thing I know about someone who goes to mass every day is somebody who does not hold themselves in the highest regard. They see themselves as a sinner. They see themselves as somebody who needs saving. They see themselves as somebody who is imperfect. And then you look today and you see that this is taken over again, and that the ideology has spread, and it's jumped into conservatism, libertarianism, basically everything. And the one way to fight it, the one way we know in the past to fight it, is Catholicism, and is people's Catholic faith. And then you see somebody like who Protestant churches go to, like James Lindsay, who's just a liberal and hates anyone. He hates God. He hates the Lord. He hates anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. And Leon Degrelle, a noted faithful Catholic, his whole life. Right. Like, he saw what was up. You can read his writing, and he'll tell you why they fought. And it's because he was a Catholic. Fundamentally, the reason Leon Degrelle, earned the Knight's Cross multiple times on the Eastern Front was because he was a Catholic. And everything.
Thomas posted a picture of him on the Eastern Front receiving the host, and that was quite emotional. But people turn another thing that people need to realize is you can't turn to people who hate you. There are some people out there, and I mentioned James Lindsay a little while ago, who can tell you what's going on, but their answer to it, the way they want to fight it, is by using liberalism. And if
Yeah,
you mention Catholicism to him,
he gets
he
highs.
he loses his mind. And he has said, somebody I have a screenshot of the tweet somewhere. Somebody had said, so we need trad cath in the West, and he said, if it comes to that, I would rather the left would win.
Yes, because right, like I don't know what his problem is growing up. Like he got told like he was a naughty boy for.
He grew up in Tennessee, from what I understand. You would expect better.
Yeah, you would, but he's a very strange man. And that's again, all of these people's problem is fundamentally that the church was illiberal, and that church had to be destroyed. And a church that is illiberal, like John Henry Newman had this 130 years ago, right? Like you can be liberal or you can be Christian, but you can't be both, right? A church that is illiberal is not worth, because then you're going to change. Dogmas change. Well, what use is any dogma then if it can change? The whole point of dogmas is that they don't change. It's not the 10 suggestions, right? Right. The 10 strongly worded suggestions that may or may not change depending on the circumstances and who is oppressing whom and who is saying them and if they're intersectionally higher up on the, no, it's the 10 commandments. It's the law of God. Those are the things that we have to worry about. And it's not necessarily that, God wants to oppress us or take away our funsies or, God's going to reach down and take away all your fun by putting out your joint and making sure that the only funsies you're having with your pants off is like in marriage with the lights off. It's that when you do certain things, you damage yourself and they're bad. And smoking weed is like smacking yourself in the face with a hammer. Like you can do it. It's just a dumb idea. Like if you want to make yourself dumber, go ahead, I guess. But it's not good for you and you shouldn't do it.
One thing that I've been trying to, if there is one thing in the past few months that I've been trying to get through to people, because people have this idea, hippie Jesus, is that hippie Jesus told us that we're supposed to love our enemies, and I love to break people's brains by telling them that he said to love our enemies. He didn't say to love his enemies. Nowhere. No. As a matter of fact, in all
commanded
Scripture,
to hate them with a perfect hatred.
Yes. And in many places, you are commanded to do much more than that. But the church has fallen to the spirit of the age, and the spirit of this age is liberalism, is
Satan.
Yeah.
It's non serviam.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think we can do much better than that. Right. I want to thank you very much for Pete for being on Fundamental Principle. Could you tell people where that you can be found and various ways to support you and whatever projects you might have going on?
Sure. Yeah. The Pete Quiñones Show, all podcatchers, PeteSubstack.com. You can go right to the podcast on a podcatcher at peteq.org. The Old Glory Club. It's a bunch of heritage Americans got together and form a fraternity, and just coming together to support each other and to raise each other up. And I would also say we have a new project that Jerome here is invited to and will be on soon, called The Inquisition, with Thomas 777, Stormy Waters, Astral from Astral Flight Projection. And it's just a panel show where we talk about important subjects like this. So watch out for that. I always put it on my podcast feed, and that's been getting a lot of great feedback lately. As conversations that people should be having but aren't. So,
yeah, I believe that was going to record here pretty soon. So please keep an eye out for that. And ladies and gentlemen, mostly gentlemen, the goal of this project is to give you the facts. Our Lord said, "I am the way, the truth, and life," and those are all capital W, capital G, capital L, and all constituent truths are somehow in His providence, part of His plan. And people that lie to you about really important stuff, whether that be in the religious realm, like liberalism, liberal religion, like dogmas don't matter, and that the faith of your children not mattering, and they can just be saved by being good people. That's Pelagianism. That's a heresy that's thousands of years old. That's not true. And as a dad, as a man, it's your job to go out there and fight for the truth. And there's a lot of truths out there that, unfortunately, that are really, really important right now that most people aren't willing to talk about. And that's the goal of this project, is to talk about those things. And so I want to thank Mr. Quiñones here for his time and for his good work fighting for the truth. So thank you, Pete. And we'll be back next time. Fundamental Principle signing out. Thank you.